Hello, everyone. This is part two of my conversation on how I stumbled across Jung with Michael Vannoy Adams. So welcome back, Michael.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it. And hello to anybody who may be watching. Thank you.
Michael, I'm just going to do a very quick recap. But as I woke up this morning, we had our conversation a couple of days ago, right? So I was thinking, what it reminded me of when you were talking was that there'd been all this change in the 60s, and then there was this kind of psychological revolution that was taking place. What stuck in my mind, you spoke about a course, a study that you undertook on Freud in America. And there were all these people like Marcuse and Norman O'Brown, and they were starting to make a commentary, a psychological commentary on things, and they started to write very interesting things. And in a way, you entered into that world through journalism, maybe, and then through your study of Freud or whatever. But it's like there was this psychology was coming into the mainstream, wasn't it? That was the thing about that time. But I wanted, before we get on to part two, because I know it's about going to London and all that, I just wanted to ask you, looking back now, what was the genius of Freud, and how do you see Freud now? And I must say, one thing for me is that, Freud to me introduced mythological, eros and civilization, life against death, or what, these grand mythological themes, these big stories started to come into, the mythic was introduced by Freud. And whether someone likes him or not, you'd have to say he's very much a genius.
Well, that's an interesting question. It's not one that I had kind of thought about in advance, of course. Thank you for springing it on me. I'll do my best to put on my best Keith Jarrett performance and improvise, okay? There are two or three things that occur to me. One is dreams. That's the lasting importance to Freud from my perspective, that he made dreams an object of scientific and other kind of study. He brought dreams really into the forefront of psychoanalysis. I mean, it was the royal road to the unconscious, is what he called it. So my sense, and I know it's absolutely true, is that the vast majority of people who are in the Freudian tradition, say here in New York, do not use dreams in their practice as much as the Jungians in New York do. And so from my perspective, that's unfortunate. I don't think psychoanalysis is just dream analysis, but I think there's been a drop-off in the sort of, not just the people who would call themselves Freudians, but the ones who are in a tradition that derives from Freud, the sort of post-Freudians of various kinds. They don't use dreams the way Freud did. Also, he was very important with Jung. Both of them agreed on one extremely important thing, is that it was possible and desirable to interpret images emerging from the unconscious accurately. Now, they had two different ways of doing that, and my impression is that one of the reasons I would prefer Jung over Freud at this point is that I'm absolutely sure that Freud developed this hypothesis about every dream being the repressed or suppressed fulfillment of the disguised fulfillment of a repressed or suppressed wish. And I believe that hypothesis is proven wrong. And I believe that Jung's idea about the compensatory function of the unconscious and his stick to the image way, which James Hillman emphasized, but it was Jung's idea. Rafael Lopez Pedraza and Jung did not invent that concept or that idea. It was Jung's. They borrowed it, and then James really went to town with it and emphasized it and made it a much more explicit part of a certain kind of Jungian approach to things. But they both thought that people, the hypothesis originally was that people are neurotic, that is, they are the more neurotic they are, that is, the more nervous they are, the more unconscious they are. And the way to make them less neurotic or less nervous was to transform and expand their consciousness. And the way to do that was through an accurate interpretation of things so that they could understand themselves truly. And that is now, I believe, also in the Freudian world and in the Jungian world. It's to do Jung's methods of interpretation are not easy. And so it's not that everybody is very competent at this. And then they also, a lot of people these days just want to kind of like do what they please in an analytic session, a so-called analytic session, and get paid at the end of the month for relating to them or some other kind of thing, or using themselves. There's all this kind of talk. There's a certain way of people, a vocabulary they use, which is, in my view of things, historically not consistent with what I define as analysis. And so Freud brought interpretation into things, and the interpretation of unconscious images. I believe his method was wrong. His theory of dreaming and his method of interpretation were wrong. And Jung's turned out to be right. Because people don't even think about it that way, they don't have the same kind of feeling about it that I have. It's sort of live and let live, and you can do what you want to do, and it's laissez-faire, and I don't know what. They're not saying, well, here's why this method is wrong and why this is preferable. They're not in a position to do that. But I think Freud, he started the dream thing. He started the accurate interpretation thing. People paid their money then for an accurate interpretation, is what I'm saying. People don't go to an analyst these days primarily because they want to try to interpret their own unconscious accurately.
Right.
Okay, now there's more to Jungian analysis than interpretation. There's a technique called active imagination and all of these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And those are, it's not just, as Jung said, an important auxiliary. I believe these are the two great methods, interpretation and active imagination. And I think when James Hillman criticizes interpretation, he's talking about a particular kind of interpretation. He's talking about what I would call conceptual interpretation.
It's a kind of a conceptualism that can creep in.
Reducing images to concepts.
Yeah.
That's what he's opposed to.
And taking away the power of the snake of the dream.
That's right. So he wants to stick with the snake or stick with the image and deal with that. But I believe you can, it's like a snake for Freud is a penis, and for Jung, it's, as I say, Freud's method is a something else method, and Jung's is a nothing else method. It's nothing but a snake. It's like Gertrude Stein, who said a rose is a rose is a rose. Okay, Freud is always saying a rose is a vagina or something. He's sexualizing everything, which also brings to another interesting difference is that I believe that psychoanalysis is a kind of form of hedonism. And it's saying something like life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I mean, happiness or pleasure, I believe, is sort of it's the supreme value ultimately of psychoanalysis. You become more conscious in order to have more fun in life. Okay, and
but that's an important point, isn't it? Because we might get the feeling that some people love neurosis just a little bit too much. And
well, there's no accounting for what people like.
But the understanding of deep, I call it deep pleasure, so just so that people don't think it's shallow, even though I am a little bit shallow in some ways, but deep pleasure, learning the pleasure principle, I suppose, to use some jargon, but there's a depth to it. There's an eros to it.
Well, Freud is he's very materialistic or something. I mean, in the
Yeah.
sense that he reduces pleasure to sex.
Yeah. That's
He's
it.
very physicalistic.
Yeah.
Jung is a more psychological psychoanalyst.
Yeah.
He is actually saying that there are varieties of pleasure, and I mean, I could talk in terms of 20th century theory of physics and stuff, the way Jung does, to
Yeah.
distinguish himself for Freud in terms of how he defines the libido, and in
Mm.
terms of energy theory in physics, and he does all this in Memories, Dreams, Reflections.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other kind of thing. But the thing I would say is that Freud is very reductive and narrow in how he defines pleasure, and
Yeah.
Jung is more expansive. And Jung he does Freud has a uh, the Marxists used to call it base and superstructure, like uh, everything derives from economics or from economic interest.
Right.
And for Freud, everything derives from sexual interest.
Yeah.
And so, in both their systems, religion, politics, every other endeavor, art,
Mm.
etc., they are sublimations of
Mm.
things in the base.
Mm.
And I call this the derivative reductive method of interpreting things. They take the so-called higher things in life and they reduce them down to the lowest thing.
Yeah.
It's like in the old alchemy stuff, you've got the sublime and you've got the base.
Mm.
I mean, it's funny that they're both called the base and superstructure, but these are base metals, right? They're
Mm.
not precious metals. And
And
so if
and
you
they're
want
like the base chakra. If we go a little
well,
Indian
yeah,
here for a
yes,
while.
yes. It's like being at the Muladhara chakra and never
Mm.
getting into the 20,000 lotus petals or something like that.
Yeah.
And you get stuck at some kind of place there. It's
Mm.
like it's finding the shit in the gold instead of the gold in the shit.
Mm.
It's a funny kind of reversal here. And
Yeah.
I'm just saying that I made a little thing I'm going to read maybe at the end of tonight, and
Yeah.
it's just a little statement about why I ultimately prefer Jung over Freud. And
Well,
so maybe we could kind of return to
let's
that, this
let's
kind of
let's
thing.
get
Yeah.
on to your story again,
So,
Michael. Like
so
going to
last time,
London and then
last time
and
yeah,
get to
we
that.
left off when I was in Austin at the University of Texas, and I was
Yeah.
taking this Freud in America course and this course on Herman Melville, and I
Yeah.
become acquainted with all this psychoanalytic work on Herman Melville.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to be reductive about it, just down and dirty, and because we don't have much time here, I'm going to
Yeah.
say that basically it's not a great stretch to sort of, if you're a Freudian, to look at the loss of Ahab's leg, his amputation, as a castration of his penis,
Right.
right? Okay, and so his ivory leg, Captain Ahab's ivory leg, is like a prosthetic device, which is to replace the penis that the white whale has come along and castrated
Right.
and bit off. Okay, and so Ahab takes a vow. It's the old Talia-Maw vow, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But the way he phrases it when he's swearing at the white whale
Mm.
is, I vow to dismember my dismemberer.
Mm.
Okay, like, well, what member is that? Well, we Freudians know exactly what member that is. And in fact, it is based on the old ancient Egyptian myth of Osiris and his twin brother
That.
Set, or Typhon, who actually cuts off his penis and substitutes a wooden phallus for the penis, just the way Ahab has an ivory leg. But that's a whole other story. That's like the mythological structure of Moby Dick. That's where
Yeah.
I sort of end up being aware of things.
Yeah.
This has not. But back at that time, it's very reductive. Again, these people are thinking that all of this imagery in Moby Dick, all of this quasi-sexual stuff, all of these mythological things come out of Melville's personal unconscious in his childhood.
Right.
He takes it all the way back to sort of a traumatic childhood.
Oh,
And
okay.
so,
That's the kind of art criticism where you take it back to his own complexes and his own.
that's right. It's very reductive.
Mm.
Okay. But for those generations, it was just seemed obvious.
Mm.
Okay. And so that's what I was coming out of. And I was just, young and eager. And, I was seeing sexual things everywhere. Okay.
Yeah.
Also, the University of Texas, there were about 35 or 40,000 people down there, and about 20,000 of them were young women. Okay. And
Yeah.
this was hippie time. And so I was seeing sex everywhere anyway, every day in some funny way.
So
And
you were
so,
a young bloke, in other words.
well, it's that
Yeah.
was a strange time.
Yeah.
Uh, anyway, Ahab's leg was a penis. The white whale was a kind of a floating penis
Right.
that was going to eat another penis. I mean, it was all kind of funny and ludicrous, and but everything meant everything and translated into everything and was convertible. It was like a convertible currency. It was like Bitcoin or something. I don't know what. There was one Kleinian interpretation at one point, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. I'm probably the only person now who knows about it. I read it in a doctoral dissertation. Some Kleinian literary critic had said that the white whale is obviously not a penis, but is a breast. And
Right.
he said it's obvious it's a breast because it's big, round, and white. You
Right.
see, now,
Yeah.
if that isn't funny racism or something like that, I don't know what. You
Yeah.
see, a big, round, and white, so it has to be a breast. It
Right.
couldn't be a big, round, black thing or a brown thing or some other color thing, but a big, round, white thing. It has to be a breast.
Yeah.
And so, the people were finding body parts everywhere, like the Kleinians see breasts everywhere, the Freudians see penises everywhere, and all this.
Yeah.
And the Jungians' world of what they see is more Gertrude Steiny again. They see a church steeple and not a penis.
Yeah.
They see things as they are. They don't think it's deceptive appearances, and they're not paranoid. It's the paranoid schizophrenic who says things are not what they seem. There's
Right.
something behind that.
Right.
And so Freud's style, as Robbie Bosnack and I used to talk about that, Freud's style is a kind of a paranoid style of interpretation. This is
Mm.
not to bash Freud or something
There's
like
something
that.
hidden behind always.
That's right. There's always something. It's something else. There's
Yeah.
something else to things, and there's
Mm.
instead of just nothing else. It's like, and so anyway, I was in that world of finding sexual symbols everywhere in Melville's works,
Yeah.
and I was having a good time. And
Yeah.
then came to the University of Texas campus another person who was a Melville scholar, Jay Leyda, Leyda, and he is a famous Toronto critic.
Yeah.
He was a great expert in Sergei Eisenstein's movies. He was a great film critic, but
Mm.
he also was, like Henry Murray, a fanatic about Melville. And Leyda did this magnificent scholarly work called the Melville Log in 2 volumes, like the log of a ship.
Mm.
The Melville Log, it had every document from the 19th century that he could find anywhere that had to do with Melville, whaling, the Transcendentalists, New England, and everything else. And this was an invaluable and idiosyncratic and terribly creative source for
Yeah.
everybody. I mean, it's a fantastic thing to
Work.
behold.
Work.
And,
Yeah.
and so and so he came on a kind of grand tour of American universities in
Mm.
1972, and one of them was the University of Texas. And my Melville professor arranged for me to have lunch with him at the faculty club.
Yeah.
And so there I was with Jay Leyda, this very important person,
Mm.
and he asked me to tell me about my own Melville research and interests and all this sort of thing. A few years later, I found out about this essay that Jay Leyda had written about the state of affairs of Melville studies in America in 1972. They was published in 1973, and in that he talked about this one student he had come across who was sort of insanely involved in trying to find a sexual symbol in everything that Melville had written.
And
And he called me,
lo and behold, that was you.
yes, he called me the hunting inspector. You see, now I see, this is hilarious. I mean, I love it. I love it. Your compatriot and my compatriot now, Peter Carey,
Mm.
in his novel Jack Maggs, he also makes fun of me.
Mm.
Okay, and there's a novel called Michael Adams,
Mm.
and there's a cowardly protagonist in the novel Michael Adams. So Peter has his way with me too. Okay, so I mean, but to me, I think this is just a wonderful thing of good friends or other people, and I can certainly live with that.
But
So anyway, I came out.
did he change your thinking? The man from, not Peter Carey, but the critic from Canada.
No, I wouldn't say that, but I was in a process toward it being changed.
Right,
And by when I got to England, that's where it occurred. And as
right.
I said, I had been awarded this great scholarship, comparable to a Rhodes Scholarship, the Marshall Scholarship.
Yeah,
And so 23 other people and I were on the SS France,
yeah.
drinking French wine and having French dinners every night for about a week until we ended up in Southampton, England.
Mm,
And then the Rhodes Scholars were on the boat too, so we could see that we were just as good as they were,
yeah.
and or just as bad as they were. That millions of other people could have been a Rhodes Scholar or a Marshall Scholar, and we weren't. We were not God's gift to scholarship on the planet. And so we get
But it
off and
was
start.
really setting off on a journey, though, wasn't it? With everyone
Yes,
on the same
yes,
boat. Like,
and yes, and it was fabulous. They usually went on the Queen Elizabeth II, but it wasn't available, so we went on a finer ship to France, okay, and had
yeah,
better food.
yeah.
And we end up and we end up in England, and we end up in London, and there are various kinds of little events there to acclimatize us.
Mm,
And then I go on off south to the University of Sussex in Brighton, and Sussex was the first of the new universities in England. It was started in 1960, so I
mm,
was arriving in 1972. So it
right,
was only 12 years old. And for a few years there, it was the number one choice university in Britain, even more than Oxford and Cambridge.
right.
Because that was what? Those were the 60s with the mods and Carnaby Street and all this and rock and
So
roll and the beat.
it was a bit more progressive there, was it?
It
Or,
was the cool place to be in
right,
all of Britain.
yeah,
Okay. And these girls from London, I never met them or anything like that. They were the so-called twins. Okay, the twins came down there in their go-go boots and their mini skirts
right,
and their Carnaby
okay,
Street stuff and Mary Quant stuff
yeah,
and like I don't know what the scene would have been like there. Okay,
yeah,
so 12 years later, I end up at Sussex, and I'm there to do a doctoral dissertation.
mm,
Sussex had offered a D.Phil at that time, and Oxford and Sussex were the only places with a D.Phil. It meant the same thing as a PhD. It
yeah,
just meant Doctor of Philosophy. But when people see it, they don't know what this is, and they think
right,
I have a doctorate in philosophy.
yeah,
Okay, but I don't. It's
mm.
just like a PhD. And now Sussex, in its cowardly way, has now gone to the PhD and ditched the D.Phil because I guess they felt it was
It
enigmatic
was
to too many people on the planet.
people didn't understand it.
Yeah, and so when I got there, that's when and where my appreciation of Jung over Freud really happened definitively over time.
Can I
I
just
wrote a
ask you a
dissertation.
question about this? Did you stumble across Jung in the library at the University of Sussex? Is that what happened? And he became a source for you, or?
No. When I was first down at the University of Texas, and I had a roommate who had come down with me from TCU, and he was one of my best friends. My brother was also one of my roommates. The three of us were in an apartment, and I used to have knockdown and drag out arguments and fights with this guy over Freud and Jung. I
Right.
was like, Freud is the great man, and he's a scientist, and Jung is an idiot and a mystic.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved to tangle, and I was ruthless and
Were you an atheist?
nasty.
Were you an atheist?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I'm an atheist now. I'm the only Jungian I think in public who's identified him. Sonu Shamdasani years ago here in New York, we were having tea, and he said, I said, what's your understanding of what makes Jungians different? He said, well, I've never met one who was an atheist. And I said, well, Sonu, you're sitting across from one. Here I am. What are you talking about? Uh, and um, and so
So Jung
uh,
was a bit, at
yeah.
that time for you, Jung was a bit woo-woo when you were having your conversations with your,
Well, I didn't have to get religion or come to Jesus to appreciate Carl Jung. Okay,
yeah,
my appreciation is totally comparative worldwide. The way I think Jung's was. I mean, Jung was sort of a Christian, but I think he was much beyond that.
mm,
He was sort of he was polymath, and he was kind of everything.
mm,
And I have to say that that would be a kind of an aspiration of my own. without getting grandiose and thinking I've beaten Carl Jung at his own game. I don't have any kind of weird ideas like that, but I'm simpatico with that.
Oh.
You know, it pleases me to try to know all about every ethnic group and every mythology and every religion on the planet, as
The
much as
way
I
he
can.
drew on so many cultures,
Well,
areas,
yes,
stories.
and as you say, Freud brought mythology in. I write about that in my book, The Mythological Unconscious. Freud brought mythology into psychoanalysis. That's one of the other great things he did.
Yeah.
But it was only, as Jung says, it was only one myth, the Oedipus myth, and only one complex, the Oedipus complex. And what Jung did, he went multiple again.
Yeah.
He's the multiplicity man. He
Yeah.
moved out from the two traditions that I can't think of the guy's name right now who does it's like the early two cultures thing. He does the Hellenic and Hebraic traditions. Matthew Arnold. Freud and Jung know the Hebraic and Hellenic traditions. They were in schuls or in gymnasiums in Germany. They had an education that was a deep humanities education at that time in classical languages and other kinds of things. You don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
And so, that's another difficulty that presents itself for the future of Jungian analysis. I've talked recently about that. But anyway, I end up in England. I'm writing a dissertation on Moby Dick. I've decided at some point, I realize that it's inadequate understanding of Melville's symbolism or imagery to believe that the source of it is his own personal psychology as a child growing up in conflict with his parents, basically the old Oedipal scenario, and that Ahab's loss of his leg has to do with the young Herman Melville's castration anxiety.
Yeah.
That this is reductive and stupid, and that the imagery and symbolism in Moby Dick is highly sophisticated and cannot possibly have been reductively derived from his own unconscious. Melville is employing or deploying these images and symbols quite deliberately, quite intentionally, and quite consciously. And so he had to have taken them from certain sources. Then my project began, well, what sources could these be? Okay, they were, and my hypothesis in my dissertation was that these were in sources in late 18th and early 19th century antiquarian research conducted by armchair anthropologists in Britain who were kind of trying to make sense of all of the different mythologies and religions that Britain had encountered by going out into the world with the age of discovery or the age of conquest or the age of empire.
Are you talking about the Golden Bough and Fraser?
Well, Golden Bough, he would be, Sir James E. Fraser was a later rendition of this.
Right.
The earlier ones that Melville, James E. Fraser was Freud's and Jung's reference point. Right. But Melville's reference point, where I will name the names, the three of them in particular. Jacob Bryant, it could have been Jacob Bryant, but I think it was Jacob Bryant, who demise was caused by a book falling on his head from a high shelf of his library eventually. Okay, this is what I would call, these are people I call the antiquarians. They were not comparative mythologists. They didn't call themselves that at the time. They were early Joseph Campbells.
Yeah, right.
But the discipline
of
comparative
thank God the world's got those people. Really?
Yeah. So Jacob Bryant was the big name. And then there was a man named Thomas Morris, spelled Maurice, but pronounced in England, anglicized in England or Englished as Morris, Thomas Morris, and George Stanley Faber. We know that Melville read Thomas Morris's 7-volume book, Indian Antiquities. Right. We can prove that by comparison of internal evidence with things in Moby Dick. I'm hypothesizing that Melville also knew Jacob Bryant and George Stanley Faber, and that he took a lot of the imagery and symbolism in Moby Dick, including the sexual stuff, from these guys who were doing proto-comparative mythology books on a large scale.
Right.
And one of these is satirized. This is a big deal in England. We don't know it these days, but in the novel Middlemarch, there is one of these people, an antiquarian, who his name is Edward Casaubon, and he is in search. He's satirized in the novel. I mean, even the British were making fun of these guys at the time.
Yeah.
Edward Casaubon was searching in search of the key to all mythologies.
Yeah.
You see, well, now one could say Joseph Campbell's first book, The Skeleton Key to Finnegan's Wake, or the James Joyce, and all of these people, Melville, etc. All of these people have been in search of the key to all mythologies.
Yeah.
And that Carl Jung was not the only one. You see, I began to think, well, Freud certainly doesn't explain Melville. It's not his personal unconscious. But then I thought, well, Carl Jung doesn't really explain Melville. It's not the collective unconscious. Actually, what I've discovered is that Melville is rather like Freud and Jung, but 50 years before them, he is studying the available sources in comparative mythology of his time.
Yeah.
And instead of writing a scientific treatise about it, like Transformations and Symbols of the Libido, he's writing novels. He's writing mythological novels, which are earlier kind of anticipations of something like Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake.
So if Melville had had an active imagination with Salome or whatever, and she said, "What you're doing is art," he would have said, "Yeah, maybe what I'm doing is art." Whereas Jung was like, "Oh no."
Well, you're going to get me in trouble because I believe that Jung often, in the most interesting way, because it shows his vulnerability and the fact that he has an Achilles heel and he's just like the rest of us and he puts his pants on the same way, or he is standing there like us without realizing he doesn't have any pants on, like the emperor. Right. Okay, and I mean we're all like this, and one of the places he does this is when he tries to interpret his own dreams or his own stuff, he's not very good at it. He's as defensive as anybody else, and he misinterprets them. Right. Okay, so when he hears the voice from he calls the anima there or whatever, right? She says, "This is art." If you're doing real active imagination, you're supposed to say, "Well, I don't get that. I don't follow you. In fact, it makes me a bit nervous because I always thought I was a scientist and this, that, and the other. What in the hell do you mean by that?" I mean, you actually inquire. You don't blow the person off. Yeah. I mean, in that exchange, he is kind of proudly, saying, "I know better than the unconscious. My ego knows better than the unconscious." So I find that again highly amusing.
So we have that blind spot towards our own stuff, though, don't we? We all have a kind of a blind spot when it comes. Well, it's easier to see it in other people.
That's why you don't do a self-analysis the way Freud claimed to have done. Okay. When Jung broke up with Freud, he said, "Your problem is that, you never let anybody analyze you." And I have to say, there's some truth in that, and I do believe one of my analysts told me that from her perspective, if you really, really ultimately get good at knowing how to do active imagination, then you can jettison your psychoanalyst. Okay. You don't need an actual physical interlocutor. You do this as an strictly internal process, and so I believe that's also true.
This is a question for later or maybe some other time, but I would like to know what you thought about that in light of James Hillman. Let's blow off the therapist and that soul making belongs to the world and the street, because that's become a strong idea.
I think that's another thing for you and me to talk about at another time, actually, when we do our thing on.
Yeah, maybe we need to get back to your story, actually.
Mike's take on James, okay? But let's just stay with this for a second here. I end up getting a reader's ticket to the reading room of the British Museum, where Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, and Virginia Woolf and everybody else had a reader's ticket. Yeah. I mean, serious. Now there's a food court there that serves kind of like fancy cuisine instead of British cooking. Yeah. Okay, but at that time, it was the big room with a dome on it. I compared it to being inside a big blue Easter egg, and
Yeah.
you sat at a desk. Nothing was remote. Nothing was by computers. Nothing like that. You had these giant books that were real tomes that were your card. You didn't have a card catalog of it wasn't that modern, right? You had these
Yeah.
giant books, and
Yeah.
you'd look in these books. Then you would go up and fill out a little card with a pencil or a little piece of paper with a pencil in triplicate or something, and you'd hand that to somebody behind the circular desk in the middle of this circular room. And then that person would zip this up in a pneumatic tube upstairs.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like
Old school.
really old school. It was
If
absolutely
Charles
fabulous.
Dickens had walked in there, you wouldn't have been surprised.
Nobody went up there. Yes, nobody went up there and roamed around the open stacks. There was no such thing in the British Museum at that time. Okay, now the British Library is located somewhere else. They got a whole new building and all that sort of thing. But at that time, it was right there in that domed room. So once or twice a week, I would ride the train up from Brighton to London. I would get off at Tottenham Court. I would walk down to the British Museum. I would go in there and I would do my research and all that. And then occasionally I would walk over in the neighborhood that was Bloomsbury. I'd walk over and look at the house that had a blue marker on it saying this is where John Maynard Keynes lived, or this is where so-and-so lived. The offices of the Marshall Aid Commemoration Commission, which gave me my scholarship, were there in Bloomsbury. Dillon's bookstore, which was the most fabulous bookstore in the world, was there.
Did you like London?
Oh, well, I
I
love
mean,
London.
apart from the cooking, I did hear your little bit of the cooking. But, and
yeah.
maybe we better edit that bit out, Michael, so you don't get in trouble and I don't get into trouble. But
Well, one of the I've got that in print. Okay, I've already got in trouble by saying cooking, not cuisine. Okay, but things have gotten better. Okay, I grant them that. Okay,
yes, yes.
And so I'd go to Dillon's bookstore. The University of London was there, so you'd always stroll over there, and if you wanted to, you could look at Jeremy Bentham's skeleton once again.
Excellent.
On display. And then the Warburg Institute was there. Where James Hillman and Rafael Lopez Pedraza and their gals spent time when they moved. They went from there it's like that's the beginning of revisioning psychology, right? Is when they make their trip to London. And they spend a lot of time at Abbie Warburg's The Warburg Institute, which is this
repository. It sparked Hillman off, that place, a lot. And he had some epiphany in there.
It's a Jewish German scholar, industrial, somebody who's got lots of money and inquires all of these ancient books and things like that. One of the Marshall scholars who became an important historian of science, Catherine Parks, at Harvard, and she was doing a dissertation there on angels. Right. I mean, I knew somebody who was in my group, my cohort of Marshall scholars, who was actually working in the Warburg, and that's where she was doing her degree. And so, I didn't do any research in the Warburg itself, but I went in there and looked around and all the sort of thing. So that was my favorite.
If we get back to your thesis, is it a thesis?
It was a dissertation.
Dissertation. It's really changing. Was that hard to what's the word? Engage that change, or did it happen kind of naturally?
Well, I wouldn't say it happened naturally. It wasn't an easy thing, but once I realized what the deal was, then I set to work. I didn't waste any time. I wasn't distraught. I didn't think, oh my God, I don't know what now. Because I could, part of the reason I realized this other thing wasn't sufficient was that I began to see there had to be something else here. And I already had a little bit of a glimmer what kind of thing it was. And then the question was, well, now, because if you read Thomas Morris's books, then he's got references in there somewhere to somebody named George Stanley Faber. So you can go to the British Museum Library and you can say, please let me have all the books of George Stanley Faber's. And you can look through them and you can say, well, is there anything in here that Melville might have used? You see, and that was my procedure there. Now, I'll tell you the other interesting thing there that you brought up with me privately and all that sort of thing is the poet and Blake scholar Kathleen Raine.
Yeah.
And her relation to all of this, and to me at that time. I was amused when you had Robert Romanician on how he stumbled across Jung, and he was down at the University of Dallas, which is of course near where I grew up and all that sort of thing, and he was down there when Hillman was there and all of these other people, and
I think he said that he was friends with Elizabeth Sewell and Kathleen Raine, and that was a tricky business because they didn't necessarily like each other.
Well,
It's a
these
bit
are
of,
serious people. These are serious people with serious commitments and interpretations and things like that. And these disagreements are to be expected. That's going to bring me to another thing about disagreements in just a minute or two.
Yeah.
And then I know we're at an hour right now.
Yeah.
So we're going to go 10 or 15 more minutes here,
Yeah.
because I think that would finish it if we do.
Yeah.
Well enough. One Sunday morning, I went to a common room near the residence. The little residence is called the Park Village, where I lived at the University of Sussex. There was a bar there. Everybody went over there on Friday nights and drank Double Diamond or some other kind of thing like that, and we danced and all that sort of thing. People would go over there and watch Star Trek on television and things. And so on Sunday mornings, they had the Times there and what was then the Manchester Guardian. And so we'd go in there and read the London Times, the Sunday Times. And so I was reading this thing, and I came across this interview or kind of article about this poet named Kathleen Raine and a Blake scholar. Well, I didn't know a whole lot about William Blake, but I loved what I knew about William Blake. And the more she had done the Mellon lectures at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And they had been published as this 2-volume magazine book called Blake and Tradition.
Yeah.
And she was talking about Blake's use of traditional symbols and mythology in his paintings and in his poetry. And so I read this thing, I thought, well, this is similar to what I'm thinking that Melville was up to.
It's kind of up your alley,
And she also mentioned Jacob Bryant and all this sort of thing. So I thought, well, she knows some of these sources.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a letter. Back then you did that, right? I wrote a letter to the London Times, to the man whose byline was on the story, and I said, I'd really like to get in touch with Kathleen Raine, and if you could pass my letter along to her, I'd very much appreciate it. And he did that. And then no sooner said than done, I heard back from her with a beautifully courteous letter inviting me to come up to 19 Polden Square.
Yeah.
This Georgian houses in Kensington, I think, and in Chelsea. And Kathleen lived next door to Valerie Elliott, the last wife of T.S. Eliot. And there have been other people, Beckett and other people had lived on Polden Square, but they were no longer there. But Kathleen was there in one of these magnificent white buildings with columns and all this. And so I show up there, and she invites me in, and she serves me scones that she's made, a jam that she's made, strawberry jam.
Devonshire tea.
Yeah, she's got clotted cream and everything. This is a trolley. She has a trolley. Okay. And so
that's great. I'd like to get one of those at my place.
We're having a very good time and all that sort of thing, She actually had a relation to the royals, and to Charles and all that. Who's the South African guy who had a relation to Charles? I can't think of his name, the Jungian who wrote a biography of Jung and all that. I can't think of his name right now.
I know. Yeah, I know.
Lawrence Vanderpost.
Yeah.
Well, he was tighter with them, I think, than Kathleen was in some way. But, there were people there with a certain affection for her. And anyway, there I was. And in her hallway, she had all these Blake prints on the wall, some of his engravings and things like that. They were beautiful. I'd never seen anything like that in a private house. So we sat down at the table and we had this conversation, all these things, and she showed me Yeats's fountain pen.
Yeah.
It was green tortoiseshell.
Yeah.
This beautiful green tortoiseshell fountain pen. She had been bequeathed this or acquired this somehow. It's passed on, like the great Irish, like Joyce and Yeats and Synge and all of these people.
Yeah.
And here she had the fountain pen,
sense of history, isn't it?
Well, it's like a libidinal object again, which I was talking about.
It's more than a sense of history. That's right. It's got
like the ink coming through there is to be channeling the spirit of Yeats.
Yeah.
And then she also showed me his ESP cards, his handmade ESP cards, and photographs of Yeats conjuring poltergeist in the air. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sitting there thinking that these are, these photographs are double exposure and things like that. But she's showing me, she's also not kind of a fundamentalist about all this stuff. Okay. She's sharing these things with me. And, I'm just tickled to death that everybody I've ever gone to, basically, that I ever approached has been totally generous, kind, and loving to me, as if they've recognized some member of a secret society that exists. I mean, it's a remarkable thing, and
that's good.
So
there's a tribe of people on the.
I'm gonna sort of lop things off here and move one other place.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna do two other things. One is I went back to America. I got some teaching jobs and all that sort of thing. And then by 1980. I went back to America in January 76. I finished my doctorate in 75 in Sussex.
Yeah.
And then I ended up back in America. And by 1980, I had a job at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania. I was an assistant professor of English and American literature and American studies. And I was basically doing kind of psychoanalytic literary criticism. I was in London once again in 1980. And I visited Kathleen again at that time.
Yeah.
And one thing she said there, this is why I mentioned Robert Romanician a little while ago. He was saying that, I don't know, Kathleen had a bit of a negative attitude toward James in some regards.
James Hillman.
Yes, James Hillman. And if Robert only meant by that she was more interested in Huxley's perennial philosophy and in spiritual matters and things like that, and in ancient systems of esoteric belief, then that's right. They were very, very different. But on that occasion in the spring of 1980, Kathleen said to me, as I was leaving, she said, "When you return to America, you should meet the Jungian analyst James Hillman." Mm. Now, for some reason, I had not heard his name or was not aware of him or
hadn't entered your orbit at that time.
And so she is a very key person here, not only in terms of my understanding of Jung and more than Jung, the whole comparative mythological background to collective psychology.
Yeah.
I
call that a little bit synchronistic, but then I know you're going to, you probably slapped me for saying that. So.
Well, I'm just going to say somebody else showing up at Kathleen's door wouldn't have had all these things going on and put all these things together. Yeah. They would have put something else together. Yeah. And so now I'm going to show you two more libidinal objects. These are the postcards these are facsimiles. These are color photocopies of my real postcards, which are over there on my bookshelf, of postcards that Jung wrote to Ernest Freud in 1913 after the Munich conference, psychoanalytic conference of 1913, where Freud and Jung had their falling out, where Freud had all of the people from Vienna abstain in re-electing Jung to the presidency of the IPA.
Yeah,
Jung was re-elected, but none of the Freudians in Vienna, because of Freud, voted for him. And these are Ernest Jones, and the aftermath of that, had corresponded with Jung. And these are the postcards he wrote to him. They both said, destroy these, please tear up. This one says, please tear up. Of course, Jones
And
did
so
what? He forwarded.
how have you got these?
I bought them from an autograph salesman in New York. I write about this in For Love of the Imagination. There's a chapter in there about the weirdness of all of that.
Yeah.
Okay, these are historically important Jungian memorabilia. There are plenty of autographs out there and things like that, but these have to do with the moment of separation between Freud and Jung and why.
Yeah.
Okay, and so I don't own the text on them. I had to get permission from the Jung Family Foundation to publish the things in my book For Love of the Imagination, publish pictures of them.
Yeah.
And I only own the actual material objects.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know. I think at that time, which was some years ago, you know, I paid maybe $1,000 a piece for them.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I have no idea after the Red Book and all this sort of stuff what they are actually worth. I'm not going to sell them. My son will, you know, pay off debts or something one of these days, I assume. So that's one thing. And then I have this last little thing to talk about why I, at this point in my life, prefer Jung over Freud.
Okay, let's go.
And so, how do I now regard Jung?
Yeah.
I'm going to use an analogy. Jung is, in my mind, Jung is to Freud as Einstein is to Newton. Newton's theory is a special case within or under Einstein's general theory of relativity. And analogously, Freud's theory is a special case within or under Jung's general theory of consciousness or transformation of the libido. With much more than all due respect to my dear friend Andrew Samuels, I have gradually come to the conclusion that there are still at this historical juncture only Jungians, no, and I repeat for emphasis, no post-Jungians. I've previously entertained one possible exception to that rule. Maybe Wolfgang Gigerich is a post-Jungian, but actually I consider Gigerich a Hegelian psychoanalyst or a Hegelian Jungian psychoanalyst, not really and truly a post-Jungian psychoanalyst. And we all know what Jung thought of Hegel's thought. It's what I think of Hegel's thought too, incidentally. For example, Jung mentions Hegel, who in my very incompetent opinion is not even a proper philosopher, but a misfired psychologist. Jung asserts that Hegel's impossible language denotes that his philosophy is a highly rationalized and lavishly decorated confession of the unconscious. It's just his unconscious in print, is what he's saying. Finally, Jung states, in the intellectual world in which I grew up, Hegelian thought played no role at all. Right. And he says his own dialectical method psychologically is not the same as Hegel's dialectical method philosophically. Yeah. Jung has been dead for 70 years. Yeah. So every contemporary Jungian analyst is post-Jung, but none are post-Jungian, whatever that might even mean. A quarter century ago, in my first book, The Multicultural Imagination, Race, Color, and the Unconscious, I joked that post is the prefix of choice. That once got a laugh from the African-American philosopher and New York Times Magazine ethicist, columnist, Anthony Appiah. The prefix post is an example of what I once mischievously and facetiously perpetrated as the philosophy of beyondism / towardism. The prefix post is so popular, I believe, simply because it provides the persons who employ it with the grandiosely delusional conceit that they are ahead of everyone else and that everyone else is behind them, that everyone else is the past and that they are the future. Now, I don't mean that that's how I regard Andrew. This is not personal or anything like that. I'm just talking in general, theoretically.
But generally, it's a bit of a put down of the past.
Something like that. And it's also a kind of, it's an attitude about knowing the future.
Yeah.
And being more than on the cutting edge of the future, being ahead of the cutting edge of the future.
Yeah.
Among psychoanalytic theories, Jungian theory remains far and away vaster than Freudian theory or any of the other psychoanalytic theories.
Yeah.
It is not at all evident how anyone might go beyond such a general theory toward an even more inclusive, comprehensive, complete theory of psychoanalysis and the transformation and expansion of consciousness. I believe that's why we're going to inhabit the Jungian paradigm for a very long time.
Right. That's
So
great.
that's all I've say tonight.
I think that's a fantastic place to leave it. And I want to thank you, Michael, for not only like a tremendous amount of experience, but the scope, of understanding about the history of the beginnings of psychoanalysis and the people and how it's come into society. And I want to thank you very much for sharing all of that.
Well, you're very, very welcome, and I look forward to doing some more fun and interesting podcasts with you. And I hope the people watching or listening have had a enjoyable time and feel it was rewarding.
Thanks.
So,
Thanks, Michael.
yeah, bye-bye.